They mocked the black waitress until she bought the restaurant and fired the manager. What if the waitress you mocked turned out to be the owner of the restaurant and your boss? Sounds unbelievable, right? But this is a true story. A story of resilience, redemption, and poetic justice that no one saw coming. Meet Jania, hard-working waitress in a small-town diner in Georgia. Every day, she showed up to work with a smile, even though her job was anything but easy. Jane wasn't just dealing with demanding customers. She faced cruelty from the very people she worked with. Her co-workers mocked her. Her manager belittled her. They never took her seriously. Why? Because Jane was a black woman, in a place where prejudice and discrimination seemed like just another part of the day. But here is the twist. Little did they know, the very person they looked down on was destined to change their lives forever. Stay tuned, because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. Jane grew up in a small neighborhood just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. Life wasn't easy for her family, but they had love and a strong sense of community. Jane's mother worked long hours as a nurse, and her father, before he passed, was a carpenter who taught her the value of hard work. From a young age, Jane dreamed big. She wanted to own her own business someday, something she could pass on to her children. But for now, she just wanted to help her family make ends meet. At 23, Jane found a job as a waitress at a local diner called Sunrise Eats. It wasn't her dream job, but it was honest work. Every morning she tied her apron, put on a smile, and did her best to serve the customers who walked through the doors. She hoped to save enough money to go back to school or start her own small business someday. But Sunrise Eats wasn't just a place to work, it was a place filled with daily struggles. Jane quickly noticed that not everyone was treated the same. While some waitresses were greeted with respect, she often felt invisible. The manager, Mr. Collins, was the worst of all. He was an older man who liked to bark orders and look down on the staff. If something went wrong, he was quick to point fingers, usually at Jane. He'd say things like, "Why can't you keep up?" or, "Maybe this job is too much for you." His words stung, but Jane kept quiet. She couldn't afford to lose this job. The other staff weren't much better. There was Sarah, who always got the best shifts, and Mike, who acted like the boss even though he wasn't. They would whisper behind Jane's back and laugh when she struggled. When it came time for promotions, Jane was never considered, even though she worked twice as hard as everyone else. One morning, Jane came into work ready to take on the day. The diner was packed, and she knew it would be a tough shift. She served tables as quickly as she could, balancing plates and drinks with practiced skill. But no matter how hard she worked, it never seemed to be enough. At one point, a customer spilled coffee on their table. Jane rushed over to clean it up, but before she could, Mr. Collins was already there, scolding her in front of everyone. "Are you blind? How did you let this happen?" he shouted. Jane apologized, but the humiliation was clear on her face. Later that day, Sarah made a snide comment as Jane passed by. "Careful, Jane. Don't trip over yourself," she said with a smirk. Jane didn't respond. She had learned to let the comments slide, but inside, it hurt. The hardest part wasn't the work itself, it was the loneliness. Jane often felt like she was on an island, surrounded by people who didn't see her worth. She tried to stay focused on her goals, reminding herself that this was temporary. But there were days when the weight of it all felt too heavy. One Friday night, the diner was especially busy. Jane had been on her feet for hours, running between tables, refilling drinks, and taking orders. She barely had time to breathe. As she carried a tray of food to a table, Mike, one of the cooks, deliberately bumped into her, causing the tray to tip. The plates crashed to the floor, and all eyes turned to Jane. "What's wrong with you, Jane?" Mr. Collins snapped. "You are making us look bad." Jane knelt to pick up the shattered dishes, her hands trembling. She wanted to cry, but she refused to let them see her break. Instead, she stood up, cleaned the mess, and kept going. Despite the hostility, Jane found small moments of strength. There were regular customers who appreciated her kindness. One elderly woman named Mrs. Thompson always asked for Jane, saying, "You are the only one who gets my coffee just right." These moments reminded Jane that she wasn't invisible to everyone. Still, the challenges at Sunrise Eats never seemed to end. Jane worked the worst shifts, early mornings and late nights. She was rarely allowed breaks, and when she asked for time off, it was always denied. Yet, she persevered. Jane knew she couldn't let the negativity consume her. She held on to the hope that one day her hard work would pay off. But behind the scenes, Jane was quietly working on something else. Every spare dollar she earned went into a savings account. She spent her nights reading books about business and watching online tutorials about managing a restaurant. Jane didn't just want to escape her current situation, she wanted to thrive. One night, after a particularly rough shift, Jane sat alone in her small apartment. Her feet ached, and her spirit felt heavy, but she opened her notebook and wrote down her goals. She wrote, "Save enough to start my own business, prove them all wrong." Jane didn't know how she would get there, but she knew she couldn't give up. The laughter, the mockery, the unfair treatment, they all fueled her determination. Jane decided she would not let Sunrise Eats define her future. The struggles she faced only made her stronger, and though no one at the diner believed in her, Jane was quietly building the foundation for something extraordinary. What the staff didn't realize was that the waitress they mocked wasn't just serving tables, she was preparing for her moment to shine. And that moment was closer than anyone could have imagined. It was a Friday evening, one of the busiest nights at Sunrise Eats. Jane was rushing from table to table, doing her best to keep up. The orders were piling up, customers were growing impatient, and Jane could feel the tension in the air. She kept her head down, focused on her work. When it happened, the moment that would change everything. The manager, Mr. Collins, stood near the counter with his arms crossed, glaring at Jane as she carried a tray of drinks to a table. Suddenly, one of the glasses tipped, spilling soda onto the table and splashing a customer's sleeve. The diner went silent as everyone turned to look at Jane. Mr. Collins seized the opportunity to make a scene. "Jane," he bellowed, "can't you do anything right? Look at this mess. You are a disgrace to this place." The customer tried to brush it off, saying it was no big deal, but Mr. Collins wasn't done. He pointed at Jane and shouted, "You are the reason this restaurant is going downhill. If it weren't for you, we'd have more happy customers." Laughter erupted from the kitchen. Mike and Sarah stood there smirking, while Jane stood frozen in place, humiliated and powerless. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she cleaned up the mess as quickly as she could and continued her shift in silence. That night, Jane went home feeling defeated. She sat on her bed, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. For years, she had endured the taunts, the unfair treatment, and the constant belittling. But this time was different. This time it felt like a line had been crossed. Instead of letting the pain consume her, Jane made a decision. She wasn't going to let them break her. She wasn't going to let Sunrise Eats define her future. She pulled out her notebook, the one where she had written down her dreams and goals, and flipped to a blank page. At the top, she wrote in bold letters, "Time for a change." Jane began to formulate a plan. She realized that if she wanted to change her life, she had to start taking action. First, she doubled down on her savings. Every extra tip, every spare dollar went straight into her account. She cut back on unnecessary expenses and worked extra shifts, no matter how exhausting they were. She also started educating herself. Late at night, after her shifts, Jane would sit at her kitchen table with her laptop, watching videos and reading articles about running a business. She studied everything: managing finances, hiring staff, and creating a positive work environment. Jane wasn't just dreaming anymore, she was preparing. But she knew she couldn't do it alone. One afternoon, after her shift, Jane struck up a conversation with a regular customer, Mrs. Thompson. The elderly woman had always been kind to Jane, and she often shared words of encouragement. This time, Jane confided in her. "I want to own my own restaurant someday," Jane said hesitantly. Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly. "And you will, dear. You have the heart and the determination. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Those words stuck with Jane. She began seeking out more mentors, people who could offer advice and guidance. She reached out to a friend who worked at a bakery and asked for tips on running a food business. She even started attending free workshops on small business management. Then, one day, an opportunity presented itself. The owners of Sunrise Eats, an older couple who rarely visited the diner, announced that they were planning to sell the restaurant. They wanted to retire and were looking for a buyer. When Jane heard the news, her heart skipped a beat. Could this be her chance? At first the idea seemed impossible. She didn't have the kind of money needed to buy a business. But the thought wouldn't leave her mind. A few weeks later, Mrs. Thompson visited the diner and noticed Jane seemed distracted. She asked what was on her mind, and Jane hesitated before opening up. She explained her dream of owning the diner, but admitted she didn't have the means to make it happen. Mrs. Thompson listened carefully and then said something Jane never expected. "Jane, I believe in you. I've seen how hard you work and how much heart you put into everything you do. I'd like to help you." Jane was stunned. Mrs. Thompson explained that she had some savings she was willing to invest in Jane's dream. "Consider it a loan," she said. "I know you'll make it work." With Mrs. Thompson's support and her own savings, Jane started the process of negotiating with the owners. It wasn't easy, but Jane's determination shone through. The owners saw her passion and believed she could succeed. After weeks of discussions and paperwork, the deal was finalized. Jane, the waitress who had been mocked and underestimated, was now the proud owner of Sunrise Eats. This was the turning point. The tables were about to turn, and those who had looked down on Jane were about to witness the power of resilience and determination. But this was only the beginning of Jane's journey. Jane's journey to owning Sunrise Eats wasn't smooth or easy, but she approached it with the same resilience that had carried her through her toughest days. Once the deal with the restaurant owners began, Jane threw herself into the process. She knew this was her one shot to make her dream a reality. Mrs. Thompson's generous loan gave her a foundation, but it wasn't enough to cover all the costs. Jane worked tirelessly, reaching out to local banks and small business programs, applying for loans and pitching her vision. At first, the rejections poured in. Bankers doubted her. Some even laughed, asking, "What does a waitress know about running a restaurant?" But Jane didn't give up. She kept refining her pitch, researching grants, and knocking on doors until she finally secured a small business loan. With the finances in place, she began negotiations with the owners of Sunrise Eats. The older couple was impressed by Jane's passion and vision for the diner. They wanted to see the restaurant thrive under someone who cared about it as much as they did. After weeks of back and forth, the paperwork was signed. Jane walked out of the lawyer's office holding the keys to Sunrise Eats in her hand. The same restaurant where she had been mocked and belittled was now hers. It was a moment she would never forget, but Jane didn't stop there. She spent weeks planning her first steps as the new owner. She wanted to transform Sunrise Eats into a place where everyone felt welcome and valued. She pored over budgets, menus, and schedules, working late into the night to make sure everything was perfect. Finally, the day arrived. Jane returned to the restaurant not as a waitress, but as the owner. She walked through the doors wearing a confident smile, her head held high. The staff, including Mr. Collins, looked confused. Why was Jane here on her day off? But their confusion quickly turned to shock when she announced, "Good morning, everyone. I am the new owner of Sunrise Eats." The room went silent. Mr. Collins's face turned red with disbelief. "You? The owner?" he stammered. Jane nodded calmly. "That's right. And things are going to change around here." Jane wasted no time. Her first act as owner was to address the toxic environment that had plagued the restaurant for years. She turned to Mr. Collins and said, "Your leadership style doesn't align with the vision I have for this place. I am letting you go, effective immediately." Mr. Collins stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The same woman he had mocked and humiliated was now firing him. Jane then addressed the rest of the staff. "This diner will no longer be a place where anyone feels disrespected or undervalued. From now on, we'll work as a team, and everyone will be treated with dignity." Some of the staff, like Sarah and Mike, looked uncomfortable. They knew they were part of the problem. But Jane gave them a choice: adapt to the new culture or leave. Over the next few weeks, Jane implemented sweeping changes. She hired new staff who shared her vision of kindness and respect. She introduced fair wages, scheduled regular staff meetings, and created opportunities for employees to grow within the business. The customers noticed the difference immediately. Sunrise Eats became a place filled with warmth and positivity. Jane made it a point to greet regulars like Mrs. Thompson personally, thanking them for their support. Jane's leadership extended beyond the diner. She started a mentorship program for young women in her community, teaching them business skills and encouraging them to chase their dreams. She became a symbol of hope and resilience, proving that no matter how difficult the circumstances, success was possible with determination and hard work. As for the staff who had mocked her, they were left to reflect on their actions. Many realized their mistakes and even reached out to apologize. But for Jane, the greatest satisfaction wasn't revenge, it was knowing that she had transformed her pain into something powerful. Now, when people walk into Sunrise Eats, they don't see a struggling waitress. They see a strong, successful businesswoman who overcame the odds and turned the tables. Jane proved that true leadership isn't about power or control, it's about lifting others up and creating an environment where everyone can thrive. The waitress they mocked was now the boss, and everyone who doubted her could see exactly what she was capable of. Jane's story is a testament to resilience, justice, and the power of never giving up. It's a reminder that no matter how hard life gets, with courage and determination, the unimaginable can become reality. Under Jane's leadership, Sunrise Eats underwent a transformation like no one had ever seen. The once toxic and tense atmosphere was replaced with a culture of respect, teamwork, and positivity. Jane understood what it felt like to be undervalued, and she made it her mission to ensure no one who worked there ever felt that way again. One of her first changes was introducing fair wages for all employees. No longer would hard work go unrecognized. She also implemented a profit-sharing program so every staff member had a stake in the restaurant's success. Jane didn't stop there. She reorganized the work schedules to ensure everyone had time for breaks and days off, avoiding the burnout that had plagued the staff before. She also created an open-door policy, encouraging her team to share ideas or concerns without fear of judgment. Staff meetings became a space for collaboration. Jane empowered her team by listening to their ideas, whether it was improving the menu or streamlining service. The kitchen staff, once overworked and underappreciated, began to take pride in their work. The waitstaff felt supported and valued. Customers noticed the changes too. Sunrise Eats became known as the friendliest diner in town. Regulars who had stopped coming because of the poor atmosphere began returning, bringing new customers with them. Jane added a personal touch, greeting guests warmly and ensuring everyone felt welcome. The menu also got an upgrade. Jane worked with the chef to introduce fresh, locally sourced ingredients and added a few signature dishes inspired by her family's recipes. The diner's reputation grew, and soon, it wasn't just a local favorite, it was a destination. But the transformation didn't stop at the restaurant's door. Jane's story spread throughout the community, inspiring countless others. One of her proudest achievements was starting a mentorship program for young women, particularly black women, who were facing similar struggles. She hosted workshops at the diner after hours, teaching business skills, financial literacy, and personal development. Her goal was simple: to give others the tools they needed to succeed. Young women in the community saw Jane as a role model. They would approach her and say, "If you can do it, maybe I can too." Jane would smile and tell them, "Not maybe you can." Even her employees couldn't help but sing her praise. Sarah, one of the waitresses who had been part of the toxic culture, admitted, "I didn't see Jane's worth before, but now I do. She's the best boss I've ever had." Mike, who used to make snide comments, said, "Jane's story taught me a lot about humility and respect. I am grateful she gave me a second chance." Customers also shared their experiences. Mrs. Thompson, the loyal regular who had believed in Jane from the start, proudly told anyone who would listen, "I always knew Jane had it in her. She's made this place better than it's ever been." One day, a group of young girls walked into the diner, notebooks in hand. They explained they were working on a school project about inspirational leaders and wanted to interview Jane. She spent time with them, sharing her journey and encouraging them to dream big. The impact of Jane's success rippled through the town. Local businesses began to take notice, adopting some of her ideas to improve their own workplaces. The diner became a symbol of hope and resilience, proving that change was possible with the right leadership. Jane's story was even featured in a local newspaper, and soon after, a regional news station ran a segment about her journey. As her story gained attention, she used the platform to advocate for equal opportunities and fair treatment for all workers. Jane's journey wasn't just about owning a restaurant, it was about rewriting the narrative. She turned a place of pain into a beacon of hope, showing that strength and kindness could create lasting change. Now, when people step into Sunrise Eats, they see more than just a diner. They see a community. They see a story of resilience, justice, and transformation. And at the center of it all is Jenny, a woman who turned the tables in every sense of the word. Her journey is proof that no matter where you start, it's where you are headed that truly matters. Jane didn't just build a successful restaurant, she built a legacy. Jane's story is a powerful reminder that resilience and determination can overcome even the toughest obstacles. She could have given up when faced with humiliation and unfair treatment, but instead, she turned her pain into purpose. Her journey wasn't just about proving others wrong, it was about proving to herself that she was capable of greatness. Through hard work and an unwavering belief in her dreams, Jane transformed not just her own life, but also the lives of those around her. She showed us that justice doesn't always come in the way we expect, but often in the way we create for ourselves. Her story teaches us something universal. Treat everyone with kindness and respect. You never know what someone is going through, and you never know the strength they might be quietly building inside. Jane's journey shows us that those we underestimate today could be the leaders of tomorrow. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Jane's shoes? Could you have stayed strong in the face of such adversity? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. If you found Jane's story inspiring, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to see more incredible stories of resilience, justice, and empowerment, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Finally, share this story with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Jane's journey proves that no matter where we start, we all have the power to rise above and create something extraordinary. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness and perseverance can change the world one step at a time.